Hey guys, what's up? Coach Justin with RYU BJJ, and I'm super excited about today's episode. I have my good friend Katie Egan. She is a phenomenal high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitor and black belt. She is works as an instructor and as a referee at multiple events around the world. Really excited to have you on the channel. Thank you, my friend, for coming on. Appreciate you. And do you want to say a little bit about your own Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu journey, what brought you to the gentle art, and your progress over the years?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to finally get it to work on our schedules. So I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu about 9.5 years ago in Dallas, Texas. I actually walked into a gym. I had bought a Groupon for a month-long kickboxing class, and I tried it, and I absolutely hated it. It was not what I wanted at all. But after the class, there was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class going on, and I saw them rolling, and I was like, no, that's what I want to do. And so they let me try it the next day. I never went back to another kickboxing class. I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I started training every single day. I started competing after 3 months, because I've done sports all of my life. And so this was like the next step along my athletic journey, and I fell in love and never stopped training or competing since then, except for COVID, which we all had to.
We all stopped for a bit there, yeah. Well, that's okay. And what are your competition accolades or achievements? This is your chance to brag.
So at black belt, I won a Pan Championship this year at Master 1 Light Feather, and then I also won American Nationals last year at black belt. I've won some other things at the lower belts, but those are my two main accolades at black belt. I also ended last season in Nogi as the number 6 Nogi adult black belt female athlete for IBJJF.
Wow, impressive. That's awesome. Well, congrats on the Pan win and the rest of it. You like competing?
I have a love-hate relationship with competing. I do love competing, but more than the competing, I love the prep that goes into it. I find that I grow the most as a person and as an athlete during the prep going into competition. When I first started competing, I did not like it at all. I actually had the worst nerves. I could barely eat day before, day of, and it was something that I thought I would never do again. But then I realized that I was progressing so much more when I had a goal to work towards, and I had something to kind of gauge where I'm at and what I need to work on.
Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, and as someone who's done a fair amount of instructing and teaching too, and sort of help foster new students who are coming in, what's your opinion on competition as in sort of speaking broadly? Like, do you think everybody should compete, or is it only if you want to type of thing?
I truly think that everyone should try to compete at least once. I think it's the best way to see kind of where you stack up, and it's the closest to a controlled fight that you could get using Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I do understand a lot of people aren't competitive by nature and don't want to put themselves in that position, but in the gym, you're constantly training with people who have been training longer than you, who are bigger or smaller, are different age. So competition is the best way to see kind of where you stack up and kind of test those techniques that you're working so long and so hard at.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. So not an absolute requirement to necessarily go to the high level competitive venues, but at least try it.
Yes.
That would be advice. That sounds good.
I think you also learn a lot about yourself when you compete, and just with the work put in to compete and putting in the extra hours, the extra drilling, extra rounds, you really learn that you're capable of so much more, and I think that's something that everyone can benefit from. That
makes a lot of sense. Well, what's your preference? Because I know you've done both tournament style competitions and super fights. Do you like one better than the other, or are they just different animals?
It's just different. I definitely feel more nervous for the super fights. Just because it's a bigger stage. When you're in a tournament, you're competing, but there's a bunch of people competing next to you and at the same time. So it just feels like there's a lot less pressure. Versus super fights, you're up there, you're the only fight going, and you know your opponent, and you're already going to go there for that one person. And so it's different, but I do think those wins are a little bit more rewarding. I remember the first time I did a pro fight up here in Seattle area and looking out after winning and seeing like your team and everyone cheering, there's no feeling like that of really being like, okay, all these people are here not only to support me, we had other teammates, but it is really cool to have that feeling of family and community.
Sure, I can see that. Well, and have you ever had to compete against somebody who you know on a personal level? And if so, does that make it harder? How does that change the geometry if you're in there against somebody in that capacity?
So I've fought against the same people numerous times. There's not that many of us competing, especially if we coming up from white to black belt. You end up seeing the same people at the same belt at different belts and continuously. So you definitely kind of foster those relationships and friendships, but it's one thing to be friends like before and after, but during those 10-minute rounds for adult black belt, those 10 minutes we're both trying to showcase our jiu-jitsu in the best way. So while it can be difficult to like the person you're competing against, we both respect each other enough that we're out there trying to showcase jiu-jitsu and do our thing.
So once the referee says come back, like it's on.
Exactly.
Right on. Well, and speaking of refereeing, then you've done a fair amount of reffing, and kind of can you talk us through that as far as where that's taken you or how that process looked for you?
So I started reffing as a brand new purple belt, mostly for local tournaments, as a way to make money in jiu-jitsu. I didn't actually think I was going to like being a referee, but it actually made me a better competitor because I started to understand the rules better and helped me understand the nuances that can be the difference between winning and losing a match. And then when I got my brown belt, I started reffing for IBJJF, and now they're the main organization that I ref for, and I'll go around the country reffing for them, and it gives me the opportunity to compete more, and it also gives me the opportunity to showcase women's jiu-jitsu in a different way. I think it's really important that, especially for the kid tournaments, that little girls see women in jiu-jitsu as athletes, as instructors, and as referees. It really shows that boys and girls can do this, and you can make jiu-jitsu what you want it to be.
Very cool. Well, and that's a great segue. So you run the Women Who Roll Instagram page, and that has quite a following. And can you talk about that project a little bit, and maybe how that started, and what your plans are for that?
So when I first started jiu-jitsu, I didn't have any female training partners. This was almost a decade ago. There was a lot less women. There were more than there were 2 decades ago, but there were not many. And so I started Women Who Roll BJJ as a way to try to encourage more women to get into jiu-jitsu and kind of share my journey and be like, hey, look, if I can do it, you can too. And it's kind of just grown from there. It's been a blog. I run the womenwhoroll.com website, and there's some blog posts. It's eventually going to be a podcast just to really promote women's jiu-jitsu, show the different sides of it, and hopefully inspire people to get into jiu-jitsu, maybe to compete more, maybe to show people what you can really achieve with jiu-jitsu. And now it's just my passion of, now I have great women to train with, and I love the growth that women's jiu-jitsu has made, and I want to continue growing that so that my daughter can have even more women to look up to and to train with and compete against.
To provide those role models. That's so awesome. That's really cool. I respect all the work you've been doing with that, and it's really cool to see that growing and becoming more and more of a thing. I started training in '97, and you're right. There have been huge changes and strides that way as far as more and more female practitioners and competitors for sure. Long term, do you have any specific plans? I heard rumors about podcasts or various. Can you speak to any of those type of ideas?
So I'm actually trying to make Women Who Roll a nonprofit to create a sponsorship for women, not just in jiu-jitsu, but in grappling in general. So wrestling, any of the grappling arts, that to help give women that ability to train if financial is a reason that they are not. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is not a cheap sport to be in. it's 150 to 250 depending on where you live, just for the monthly fees. Plus Ghees are, $150, $250, and everything that goes into that. And then competing, it costs $150 to compete at an IBJJF, plus travel, hotel, all of that stuff. And so I know that's a barrier to a lot of women, as it was when I was first starting out. So I want to create a nonprofit that helps support that and hopefully help grow women's competition. There aren't many of us competing. A lot of the tournaments, I don't have many people in my divisions, and I would like to see that grow. And so that's one thing I want to do is focus on creating that nonprofit. And then the podcast is another pet project that I have that I want to do, which is just, there's so many women that I've met through jiu-jitsu that have these amazing stories that I think don't have a voice, and I would love to give that voice of sharing their perspective on being in Brazilian jiu-jitsu and hopefully inspire even more women.
Very cool. That's awesome. Well, okay, so to dig into some issues then that might affect women or say smaller grapplers in class with the guys that are over 250 pounds, and trying to negotiate that in a way that everybody becomes better as a training partner. This is a question I definitely wanted to ask you. So if, at least in my experience, for the bigger, stronger grapplers who might be new to grappling, you could have a couple of problems exist. One could just be have somebody who's a bit of a jerk and they're using their size and it's fueled by their ego and they don't want to tap and they don't want to look bad, and that's kind of its own problem. But you could have a second group maybe that genuinely wants to be a good training partner, but they just don't understand how much bigger or stronger, how they should be rolling with somebody who's smaller than they are. How would it be best to negotiate those situations, or what can somebody say, or how can they advocate for themselves, or just help that person become a better training partner for the gym?
I think it's really important, whether you're a different size or a different belt level, to really tone your training down to your partner. So if I'm rolling with a white belt or a blue belt that's my size, I'm not working my A game all the time where I'm just tapping them every 30, 45 seconds. But the same thing goes with someone that's much bigger than me. They shouldn't be using all of their strength. If they have 50, 100 pounds on me, they're going to be stronger than me. Even a man that's my size is going to be stronger than me. And so you just tone back the muscle and everything to match your training partner, and then that creates a safe environment for everyone, whether you're bigger or smaller. Just like I don't want the big white belt to muscle me around. Well, the big white belt doesn't want me to just armbar him 10 times in our 5-minute roll. Right. Neither of us really get too much out of that, so we tone both of it down, and we both find a ground where we both can learn something out of it.
Got it. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense for sure. And then do you see, as far as advantages to working with somebody who's like a bigger grappler looking for advantages to working with a grappler who's smaller than them? The reverse, I think we often say, well, if I'm working with somebody who's stronger than me, then if I get into a tournament, nobody's going to have that level of strength, so now this has benefited me. But the reverse, where somebody who's bigger is working with somebody smaller, what are the advantages you see for that person?
Something I always say is that small people find small spaces. So one thing that you always talk about the bigger grapplers being stronger, and yes, they are stronger, but I think that can be harder to like armbar me or knee bar me because my arms, they're while proportional, they are smaller, so my elbow can come out easier because of the size difference, which will make the bigger grapplers better, because they have to really focus on doing the technique correct. Because if they do it sloppy, the arm's going to come out, I'm going to get out of that arm bar, or my knee's going to come out and I'm going to get out of that knee bar. Sure.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. Also, I see benefit to, if you've ever been a big guy and ended up in turtle with somebody smaller and faster than you on your back, like that's kind of a nightmare too. So as a school owner, I run into that question a lot where, you have somebody that's maybe bigger or stronger, and they're hesitant to train with somebody who's small. They don't see the benefit, but I think that's super helpful in improving that mindset, so to speak.
I really truly believe that you can get something out of every person in the gym as long as they're being safe. I really believe in saying you can say no to any role for any reason, but I don't think you should all the time. I think you should be training with different partners of different body types. With that being said, when I'm getting ready for a tournament and I'm not going to be competing in the open class, I really do scale back who I train with. But as you know, James Foster is a large human, 310 pounds, and I train with him, and I still get a lot out of that, and he does too, even though I'm 115 pounds. And I think that goes for anybody. You just have to go into it with a different mindset. It's kind of like when I roll with a white belt, I can let them pass my guard and work on my defenses, versus someone closer to my skill level, I can work more on my offenses.
Absolutely. No, I would agree with that. How about for gym owners out there, as far as offering women's only classes? Do you see that as a win, or should they just have mixed classes? I guess essentially the whole time. What's your opinion on that?
I think if there is a demand for it, you should definitely provide that. I think sometimes women are a little hesitant and maybe a little scared to roll with male training partners, especially if they come from a background of abuse, or depending on why they're getting into jiu-jitsu, because a lot of women do get into it as self-defense. So I do see the perks of having a women's only class. With that being said, we do not offer one at Foster Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I think part of that is because the demand isn't there, because we have so many women training constantly, and we have created such a safe environment that it is safe for women to train with the men in the academy.
Well, that's a great point. So I definitely want to get your opinion on that, as far as like fostering a good gym culture for everybody, but in particular with your advocacy for women. What are some ways people can work, school owners or just members of the gym can work towards achieving that?
I think one of the main thing is you need to have women as instructors. I think obviously if you're beginning to grow your women's program and you don't have any upper belts, it makes it harder, but I think having women in places of power is important, because they can advocate for the women, for their female students, and I think it also shows the level of respect you have for women in jiu-jitsu. Gyms that don't have female instructors can bring them in to teach and still support the women in jiu-jitsu in that way as well. But I think it's really important that as a female athlete, that you're also learning from women and not just men. And it shows your belief in women in jiu-jitsu. Another thing is just fostering that safe environment where it's okay to say no to roles, whether you're a woman or a man. This isn't a female-male issue. Like, anyone should be able to say no to a role. I mean, there's times where I'm like, no, I'm not rolling today, not because of any reason, but maybe I'm a little banged up, and Coach Foster does the same thing, and I think that's okay. And creating that environment where you can feel safe coming in and not having to roll helps women feel safe to say no to people that they're not necessarily comfortable with.
Sure. Yeah, no, I would agree. That's hugely important. Well, and then further from that, from a self-defense standpoint, I know you brought that up. Do you think that training solely in sport jiu-jitsu is enough for self-defense, or do you advocate for people training in like self-defense specific classes, particularly for women who are interested in like a street self-defense approach to jiu-jitsu?
So I've only trained like sport Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I haven't done any self-defense besides the little bit that has been added in over the years. So I've never taken a full like self-defense class or anything. I do think that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has given me the confidence to feel like I could control a situation, but less so in getting into the fight, but de-escalating. I think martial arts in general, it should be the last resort. you shouldn't be using martial arts like in going out there and getting into fights. You should be de-escalating the situation and then controlling the person and getting help or getting away and creating space. And in that regards, I think sport jiu-jitsu can help. With that being said, I'm a big advocate for like carrying pepper spray and keeping yourself safe and being aware of your surroundings. Unfortunately, we live in a world that there are bad people that want to do bad things. And I don't think that any amount of training can necessarily stop someone if they want to hurt you. Sure. And I think women should get into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but it's not going to be the fix-all, and I'm never going to get mugged or anything like that.
Having that awareness, yeah, I think you're absolutely right, is key. Well, and then further downstream from that, as far as advancing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and belt ranks and that sort of thing, I wanted to get your opinion on what those mean, kind of your opinion on, I know broadly speaking, as there's been kind of a rise in the Nogi meta in Jiu-Jitsu, belts, Ghees have kind of become this for some people, object of scorn, or, do promotions really mean anything, that sort of thing. To me, a black belt means something, but I'm curious what your take is on that. What should a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt represent? I
think, I maybe have a more old school mentality on this, where a black belt shouldn't just know good jiu-jitsu. I think they should also be a good person. I think, like for me, my legacy isn't that I'm a black belt, but the people that I've inspired and affected through jiu-jitsu. And I think while being really good at jiu-jitsu is a way to get your black belt, I think that along the way, some people have kind of lost that kind of old school mentality of using your black belt in jiu-jitsu to help other people.
Cool. No, I like that answer. I would agree wholeheartedly. I have said this on other episodes, but it seems to me that if it was just reflective of your ability to roll with other elite black belts, then as we age or if we got injured,
you'd lose it.
You're right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. We don't do that, and I'm glad we don't do that. Really.
Me too.
Yeah. But I agree with you. It should be a reflection of your skill. In other words, we shouldn't just hand it out because the person was a nice person who walked into the gym. But it has to mean more than that. Aside from that, looking kind of at how jiu-jitsu might have changed in the time you've been training, what are some ways you've seen the sport evolve, for better or for worse?
First off, women's jiu-jitsu is exploding. I mean, it's phenomenal. I think last year at my adult black belt bracket had like 20 some people, which is incredible. At black belt and light feather, it was a huge.
Wow.
I wish I knew the exact number, but it's huge. And now you see so many more competitors coming, and I'll still complain that there's not enough of us, but it's growing so much, and I absolutely love that there's so many women coming into jiu-jitsu, and in like wrestling is exploding as well. Sure. And I think it's amazing that this male-dominated sport, that women are coming in, and people like Michelle Wagner and Cindy Hales are pioneered this for us, to give us the space to be able to do this and compete. And once upon a time there were like 2 or 3 divisions for women, and now we have a ton, and there's a bunch of different weight classes, and a lot of times they're really full weight classes. So like that's been really awesome to see going through. I mean, like I had said previously, when I was a white belt, I didn't have female training partners. I remember I never wanted to be a black belt. I wanted to be a purple belt because the only female training that I like ever saw like in person was a purple belt, and I was like, "That's so cool! I want to be just like her." Because there weren't that many women training back then, and in order to train with other women, I had to go to other schools to cross train, or I would compete. So I could. The first time I rolled with a girl was my first competition.
No joke, really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's wild. Well, you mentioned a couple of names already, but I was going to ask you this. As far as pioneers in the sport or people you looked up to while you were coming up, anybody, Cindy Hales definitely is a name, and Michelle Wagner for sure.
Yes, and those are like the two big ones in the Pacific Northwest. There's also like Michelle Nicolini, Mackenzie Dern,
Sure.
Luisa Monteiro, Jazara Matuda, all these Patty Fontes, who I actually just fought at Master Worlds.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I remember coming up as a white and blue belt, watching her compete at black belt, and now I'm a black belt, and I just got to fight her last week, and then I fought Tammy Musameshi in Nogi.
Wow.
So it's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is really cool as a competitor, because these people that you idolize and look up to, all of a sudden now they're your competition.
Yeah.
And I don't know any other sport that happens.
Yeah, hard to meet your idols in those sports.
Yeah.
And the controversial question in jiu-jitsu being Ghee versus Nogi, right? I'm really interested in your take on this as a competitor, as somebody who's an instructor, and even a referee. What do you prefer on a personal level as far as rolling and competing? And then do you think that there's value in both? And do you think everybody should equally train both, or just try one and figure out whatever one works best for them? I guess, where do you see the landscape as far as Ghee versus Nogi?
So honestly, it depends when you ask me about what I like more. In the summer, I like training Nogi more because it's so hot and I don't want to put a gi on. And in the winter, I like Ghee more because it's cold and I want to put my gi on. But in all honesty, I train both about 50%. I run the Nogi program here at Foster Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I still train a lot of Ghee. And my main accolades actually come in the Ghee rather than Nogi. I think that there are benefits for both. But I'm also very much, if you don't like the Ghee, you don't need to train in the Ghee. If you don't like Nogi, you don't need to train Nogi. Most of us are in here as hobbies, and I don't think there should be a clear-cut way of you need to do this or you can't progress. And I think this whole Ghee versus Nogi, it's just more division, and
Sure.
and I don't see any purpose for it. And I will say, as a competitor though, that people that only train Nogi, if they go into the Ghee, they have a much harder time going from Nogi into the Ghee rather than vice versa. Going from Ghee into Nogi, it's a lot easier. You don't have the same guards, you don't have the lasso and the spider and all that kind of stuff, but it's all the same for the most part. Versus going from Nogi to the Ghee, you have way more that you might not have seen. You have all these collars and sleeves, versus you just lose that going the other way. I don't know if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. How about other advantages or disadvantages? I know a lot of people will say, like, well, your escapes will get a little bit better in the Ghee. Your ability to hold people down will get a little bit better in no Ghee because you have to maintain or control that space better. Do you see anything that way, or is it really just come down to preference and you should just enjoy your jiu-jitsu?
I really just think you should just do what makes you happy. And if that's Nogi, then you should do that. And if it's Ghee, you should do that. I think as a competitor, you should be well-rounded. But if you're just in this for the journey and for having fun as a hobby, then just do what makes you happy. You're paying a service. You shouldn't have to do something that someone tells you just because you're like, this is the way it's done. You have to train in the Ghee or you can't progress.
Right.
I don't believe in that. I think this is a sport, but not everyone's here to be a competitor. Sure. And not everyone's here to be a world champion, and that's all right. And everyone's on their own journey, and they should make that journey for themselves.
Makes sense. How about MMA? Again, when I started, like in the 90s, like it was called NHB then instead of MMA, but
was it really?
Yeah.
What did that stand for?
No holds barred instead of mixed martial arts. Yeah, it was.
I feel young now because I had never heard that.
Oh, really?
No, I've never heard that.
Yeah, it was NHB competition, and then I think that just the sound of that was not as nice. MMA was a little, there's art in it, so they switched that up. But the two groupings, I guess, jiu-jitsu and MMA, or NHB was like, they were almost synonymous. Like they were kind of the same crowd culturally. They were pretty unified in a lot of ways. And there's at least in my view, a pretty big split now. I mean, there is crossover. There's certainly jiu-jitsu athletes that do MMA and vice versa, but they are their own separate things. Do you, in a sport jiu-jitsu competitor's life, do you see MMA playing any role? Do you have any aspirations, or have you had any aspirations towards MMA?
Once upon a time, I kind of thought about going into MMA when I was like a 4-stripe blue belt. And then I realized that I like punching people, but I don't like getting punched, and that it's really not for me. And when I kind of talked about transitioning, I was reminded that you can't be good at two things. You can be okay at two things, but it's hard to excel at both. If you're trying to do something and you want to do it well, putting most of your effort into one is going to be you're going to be more successful. So then I kind of stuck with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I haven't really felt the urge to ever go into MMA. Not saying that I might not, who knows what the future holds, but right now I love Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I can't even imagine adding striking into it.
Sure.
While I do have some striking background, it doesn't line up with my aspirations and goals. With that being said, like, I know a lot of people do both, more so in the Nogi. Now we're going back to the Nogi versus
Sure,
Ghee.
sure.
There are Nogi people that are only doing jiu-jitsu to do MMA. And I think that's great. Again, it goes back to do what makes you happy, and if you like it, do it.
Sure. No, I think that's fair. Do you follow either MMA or do you follow competitive jiu-jitsu in terms of, like, as a fan? Did you watch like CJI and ADCC just from a fan standpoint, or do you tend to watch those more as like a potential competitor in those big arenas?
So for the most part, I don't watch jiu-jitsu on my off time, only because they're reffing most of the majors.
Got it.
So, I'm not sitting at home watching flow grappling because I'm out there reffing worlds or competing at worlds. With that being said, I was not in CJI or ADCC, so I did watch those. And I did watch those more as a fan. The main thing I watched it was to see Mackenzie Dern and Fionn Davis compete, because that was such a cool match.
Yeah.
Like, that was really cool, and I also had friends competing in ADCC. So for the most part, I look at it more as a spectator, but I'm still looking at it as a competitor, watching the meta, seeing like what's working, what's not working, who's pulling guard, who's not pulling guard, oh wow, that was a beautiful takedown. Too bad I can't use that because everyone pulls in my division.
Do you have any favorite competitors? Anybody you really like watching?
Not really, just because right now the people that I'm watching are also my competition.
Got it. Sure.
So it's when I was a lower belt, I did idolize those people, but I now have to look at them closer as competition rather than as people I look up to, because I don't want to go out and be across from them and freeze because I've built them up on this pedestal in my mind. Yeah, there are some people that I really enjoy that are in a different weight class.
Okay.
So Fionn is
It's pretty exceptional.
She's the GOAT, I think. She's one of the best out there, and I do enjoy watching her. And luckily, she's a little bit higher weight class than me. Not that we might not ever see each other in the open class, because I do open class sometimes. So that's the other thing, is that there are people that I will watch, but I don't look at it as a fan, but necessarily, but more so as like a potential competitor.
So it's a fact-finding expedition. Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned mindset, and that's really interesting to me. So you have to look at these as potential opponents. As far as mindset as a competitor, I guess it kind of goes without saying that mindset is important. Like, the physicality of it is important, but most people, I think, would say the mindset's probably the primary thing. What things do you do, or have you found helpful as far as fomenting or fostering a good mindset, keeping your mental health on track as a competitor, because that's so hugely important?
So I have worked really hard with my mental training over the years. I've competed throughout my journey, but a lot of that in the beginning could have been more successful had I had a better mental training outlook, where I didn't let the nerves kind of take over and lose focus of like my jiu-jitsu. So a few things that I do and that I give advice to all of my students and anyone that is struggling with competing is that when you're feeling nervous, physiologically, it's the exact same thing as excitement. It's just the negative or positive connotation that you're putting on it. So I really do a lot of reframing of things in my mind of, okay, I'm not feeling nervous, I'm excited.
Right on.
And then it kind of helps take that kind of negativity away from it. And so then it makes competing a more positive experience.
I love that.
And then the other thing, I mean, I do a few different things. So like the positive mental attitude, like totally really important of like just, not letting any negative talk stay in my brain, where I reframe it where I'm like, oh, I might lose. I'm not going to entertain any thoughts like that. So I really reframe it and kind of fake it till you make it, where you just positively talk about yourself. The day of, I do a lot of mental visualization where I'm like thinking about past successes, I'm thinking about my training and all the hard work I've put in, and focusing very much on myself and not focusing on who I'm fighting or anything like that, where it might take away from the prep I put in.
Yeah.
And then right before I go out on the mat, I have a mantra that I say, and I say, I am calm, I am composed, I am a champion. And it just kind of really centers me, helps me ignore all the outside noise and just focus on my jiu-jitsu and implementing my game and not necessarily reacting to theirs.
Powerful. Well, and so interestingly, I heard the rumor that you might be then putting pen to paper and writing about your experiences or your advice on maintaining mental health as a competitor or as a practitioner. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, I'm currently writing a book with regards to mental training and using that as an athlete, but also with mental health. I'm a huge advocate for taking care of your mental health, and mental health matters. And I, a long time ago, attempted suicide, and I've struggled with depression throughout my adult life, something that I'll probably always struggle with. But I've really been able to use the tools that I've learned as an athlete with mental training to help mental health in the gym and outside in my every day-to-day life. So I've started trying to create this book and as a tool for people, not necessarily athletes, but you can use it as an athlete or as a regular person to help with the mental health barriers and the struggles of everyday life.
Got it. Wow. What can you speak to? I've seen repetitively as a theme in jiu-jitsu amongst practitioners, there's a strong belief in jiu-jitsu as a therapeutic process, and I think it can be powerful as that. That doesn't necessarily mean that it is the same as medical therapy or the only thing that you should depend on necessarily. I don't know if you could speak to that point at all.
So I do say that jiu-jitsu is kind of my therapy, and with regards to when I'm here and I'm rolling and I'm trying to choke someone, or someone's trying to choke me or take off my arm, it kind of quiets those voices in my head where all I'm focused on is my breathing and my movement. And so it really helps me kind of dissociate from all the issues and all the problems going on in the world. With that being said, I think jiu-jitsu is a strong tool for mental health, and it can help with all of that, but I don't think it's a replacement for therapy or getting the help you need or the other things that you need to be doing to take care of yourself, both physically and mentally.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's an important point to drive home. And I'm obviously a big believer in jiu-jitsu. I think we both are. We've both been training for quite some time, and for all those reasons you mentioned, it is very therapeutic. But there are other parts to the equation for sure. That being said, what have you taken away from jiu-jitsu, or what would you sort of extol as the benefits of jiu-jitsu maybe not just the physical ones, getting in shape and that sort of thing, but that you could take outside of the training room that benefit you as far as your life and in other areas?
I think it's really, so I talked about how I got into jiu-jitsu, but the reason I got into the kickboxing class is because I was a survivor of sexual assault and domestic abuse. And so when I came into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I was a very broken person. And Jiu-Jitsu helped rebuild me. It's really cliche to say that Jiu-Jitsu saved my life, but it really did. It came into my life when I needed it most, and it wasn't even like I looked for it. Not to say that there's some higher power, but it did come into my life, and it really helped rebuild me. And it taught me the confidence to believe in myself and to believe that I'm capable of much more. And that has gone outside of jiu-jitsu. It's given me the confidence to kind of be my true self and be proud of who I am. And I think that's something, I'm not sure if everyone feels that way, but that's really been a huge takeaway for me in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Got it. Yeah, that's profound. So your daughter trains, and she's been training for a while, and has also been active in the competitive arena too. I know you mentioned being a woman and being there as an inspirational role model. How cool has that been to train with your daughter and see her progression through things? And I guess we'll start there. Yeah.
So my daughter Michaela is a yellow belt. And she's grown up pretty much, she's 12. So for most of her life, I've trained. I've trained for almost a decade now. And I have pictures of myself competing, and she'd be mat side as I'm competing there. So jiu-jitsu's been a huge part of her upbringing. And now it's part of the reason that's kept me going on times where, everyone's journey is hard. And there's always been times where I'm like, maybe this isn't for me. And being a mom has helped give me that purpose of, no, I want to show my daughter that I can do this even when it's hard. And that's, I can give a lot of credit to my daughter for inspiring me to become a black belt. Because I want her to be able to do anything she puts her mind to, even when it's hard.
Got it. No, that's for both of you, your own career as a competitor, and then beyond that, and for your daughter, what are your hopes as far, or things that you would see in the future that way? What would you like to see her take away from jiu-jitsu or accomplish, and what would you like to accomplish going forward with the rest of your career?
So I've been, she's grown up in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and she has competed a fair amount, but I never want to put the pressure on her to be the same person as me. I don't want a carbon copy of me. I think I'm pretty awesome, but I'm just kidding. But I've only encouraged her to compete when she's wanted to. So I think I hope that she continues and gets her own black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But I also recognize that she's her own person, and that maybe this isn't necessarily her path. But I do think it's teaching her resiliency and all the really important tools to be successful later in life, even if it's not in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. With that being said, eventually I want to own my own academy, so it's probably going to be, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is going to be in my life for forever. You're going to have to roll me out of here in a wheelchair before I stop rolling. And training and instructing. So I do want to own my own academy, and with her being my daughter, she's going to have to kind of be a part of that. I hope she can help me run the kids class.
Yeah, that at least, having somebody to help run the kids class is a huge thing, for sure. Well, yeah, and I think that's a great answer. So all of you hover parents out there, take notice. It's good, I think, to have goals and to be able to push our kids and be an inspiration for them, but not necessarily to always try to direct exactly what they're going to do. I think that you're exactly right about that. And I like to ask this question to anybody who comes onto the channel. If you were advising anybody, and you could direct this towards women specifically if you'd like, because I think you'd be a good person to speak on that, but somebody who's just starting their jiu-jitsu journey or interested in it, but they hadn't taken that leap yet. Because we both know jiu-jitsu is always hard. It's always super hard on the ego, and it's just a difficult endeavor, and that's part of what I think we love about it. But especially in the beginning, there's a very high attrition rate. You're getting used to all these, unfamiliar terms, and to say nothing of like the body mechanics and movements that feel very unfamiliar and strange to most people. What words of wisdom would you impart to those people who are just starting?
I think I have two pieces of advice, actually. The first is to give yourself grace. If this is your first experience with a martial art, it is very hard. You're learning a lot of stuff, and you're going against people that have been doing it for much longer. So it's really easy to be discouraged, even later on when you're a blue belt, a purple belt, and you're not seeing your own success and your own progression. It's really hard to stay motivated and to stay disciplined in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because you're in there every day or a couple times a week, and you can't see your own progress. And I think it's okay to have bad days. We all have them. Even black belts sometimes come in and you're just like, well, today I'm the nail. Yeah. and it's okay. And it's okay the first step of doing anything is to be bad at it. You're not going to step on a mat as a brand new white belt and be the best that there ever was.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean you can't be. And so like that leads into the second one is you're capable of more than you think. And that goes outside of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well. Like, you can do so much. Imagine if you don't give up on something, where you can be in 2 years and 5 years and 10 years. In 10 years, you could be a black belt, as long as you don't give up. But it's going to be hard, but you have to believe in yourself.
Awesome. Inspiring words. I love it. Really looking forward to what you have to show technique-wise. Thank you so much for coming on the channel. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.